I just want to do well in finishing our series on Evergreen. Evergreen. And so we've been in this series now. This is, I think, the 8th week. And Jordan has come, and we've been through all of that, talking about the parables of Jesus, and specifically the agricultural parables of Jesus. And there's Psalm 1. This is the verse that we've been kind of using as our anchor point verse, and it ties in so nicely with the whole idea of the blueprint. It's a little bit more organic in nature, but it ties into that. It ties into what Carolyn was talking about as well during worship. But it says, "Blessed is the one who does not walk in step with the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the company of mockers, but whose delight is in the law of the Lord." You want to talk about truth. The law of the Lord, who meditates on his law day and night. It takes work to do that. And then here's the benefit of it. And this is the part that we love, is this benefit part. And this is the part that ties us in with our series. That person is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields fruit in season, and whose leaf does not wither. It remains evergreen. Whatever they do prospers. And then it goes on to say, not so the wicked. They're like chaff that the wind blows away. And so you got this amazing word picture from David. This is Psalm 1. I mean, this is out of the gate, right? In terms of Psalms. And we all know the Psalms. There's so many stories in there. And there's Psalms of lament. And when David is praying, oh, woe is me. And then there's all Psalms like this, where it's just like, if you can just stick to the plan, if you can just stay with God, if you can work it out with God, your life will be full of fruit and prosperous. As we looked into the parables of Jesus, Jesus really kind of put his finger on a bunch of the details, right, in the parables that we walk through. We talked about vineyards, we talked about mustard seeds, we talked about thankful servants, we talked about unthankful servants, we talked about wicked servants, we talked about the soils and the condition of the soil, the condition of our heart, and weeds and all kinds of things as we walk through this series. So I really am jealous for the idea of application. You know, people in Jesus' day heard these stories. Some of them may have remembered them. Some of them may have even thought about them past remembering them. But it was the ones who applied them that gained the benefit. And wouldn't it be a shame if we got through all these parables and it's like, oh, great, springtime, parables of Jesus, agriculture, cool, that's a nice little... And then we moved on and we never really had seed planted in our heart to let something grow out of it. And so that's really what I'm wanting to do in these next two messages this week and next week. Next week will be super applicable. But how do we apply these parables? And if you haven't seen them, all of these are available for you on our YouTube channel. Like, how do we apply these? And as I scan this crowd, and I'm so thankful that Madeline was here as well. We're talking about youth. The kids are here. I mean, we got we got two real little ones. When is Jesus talking about? When is David talking about? When do we apply these? Like, do we apply them when we get full grown? Do we apply them in our later years? I've noticed that people tend to get more religious the older they get, and some people have said, well, they're cramming for the final exam, So we see all these stages, right? We see all these stages. And so, there are multiple applications to a person in this room. Because you're at a different stage in your lifespan. You're also maybe at a different stage in your walk with God. And maybe you're younger, but you've been a Christian longer than some people who are older and have just received Jesus. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And so when you apply these, where and how does it apply? And does it work? Like, does it work? And how much am I supposed to work at this? And how much do I want to work at this? Right? Like, do I really want to meditate on the law of God day and night? And is that the only way that I'll be like a tree planted by streams of living water, bearing fruit in season? My leaf is evergreen, never withers. Is that the key? Then really, what's the return on investment here? Are you with me? Mm-hmm. It's just a struggle here. You certainly don't want it just to hit the brain and disappear. You want it to hit the brain, hit the heart, and find a lodging place, as my friend Jerry Jerry French used to always pray, during Bible study, he used to always pray, may this word find a lodging place in our heart, and may it take root and bear fruit. And I would really hate to go through all these stories of Jesus and all of those things and miss it. And I specifically would like to, and this is what we talked about in week 1, apply it to the stages of our life. We're all at different stages, right? The stages of our life, the seasons of our life, because even though we're in a different stage, there's different seasons that come and go, and the storms of our life. The storms of our life. So that's really where I want to lean into as we apply these. So let's talk about the stages of life. Let me talk about agriculture, so we know that there are these plant life cycles. And we've been watching this if you've been planting a garden. And by the way, my wife and I worked outside all day yesterday. So if you think, oh, Pastor Rob's got some new cologne, it's not. It's Rub A535. Right? Used to have the Absorbing Junior, but now it's, so if you smell that, it's like, okay, Pastor Rob has a sore shoulder. Because gardening takes work, right? Anybody can I get a witness in the house of the Lord, right? It's like, oh, your garden looks beautiful. It's like, yeah, well, that didn't happen by accident. The life cycle of a plant, you got the seed, you got germination where it takes roots. It takes root. Then you have the sprout that comes through the soil, and it's so exciting, and it's like, yay, my beans are growing. And my wife carefully takes me around to all the stuff that's growing in the gardens. And then you have the seedling where the leaves start to form, and then the what's it called, the photosynthesis? Easy for me to say. Thank you. Wow, you guys are right there. I love it. Chlorophyll and all of that amazing stuff that God created in the leaves. And then if it's a tree, you get this sapling, and then the sapling becomes a mature tree that you can climb, and then eventually, if it's a fruit tree, it will bear fruit. And if it's not a fruit tree, it will bear seeds, and those seeds will reproduce. That is a great word picture of what we should be doing spiritually. Amen? Because we should be kind of walking our way through all of those steps spiritually, but knowing that there's also stages to life. Stages to life. And the human life cycle is infant, exhibit A, right? And then toddlers, and if you want to know what a toddler is, just wait until you're having your coffee and your cookie after service. They're the ones that are burning around with all the energy, burning holes in the rug. Childhood, which is where the toddler starts to learn independence and kind of, move away from mom and dad and start to learn some things. And then you have the pre-adolescence. Don't we love those pre-adolescents? And then we have the adolescents. And don't we love the adolescents? Can I get a witness in the house? And then adolescents, thank the Lord, turn into adults. Hey, if you have adolescents in the room, I promise you this happens. I can promise you. Daniel, as an empty nester, I can promise you, and don't take offense, Noah, it's the way God built life, okay? And then we move into senior adults. And those are all the stages of life. So as we're applying truth, Madeline is applying some amazing truth that she got at Overflow. If you and I went to Overflow, we would need earplugs and the nearest exit. Right? And we'd probably find it not hit us. Why? Because we're at a different life stage. Amen? It might be good. But the music, come on. Way too loud. Different life stage. Not for me, but for some other people. See, 1 Corinthians 13:11 points out that there are life stages, and Paul specifically, who is a great point of reference, says, when I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child. I understood like a child, but now I am a man. He's talking about the life cycle. I do not act like a child anymore. And he's talking specifically physiologically, but he's also talking spiritually too. And some of us need to grow up in our faith. Amen? We need to see some of these things, meditating on the law of the Lord day and night so that we can bear fruit, right? And have an evergreen life. That's the way it works. Ecclesiastes, Carolyn went to Ecclesiastes. We're doubling down here. And this is such a fantastic verse about old age. And I don't know how Solomon knew this, But Solomon he kind of talks metaphorically here, but he says, when the keepers of the house tremble, which is, we have it up there? When the keepers of the house tremble, which some people think he's talking about the hands, because when you get older, your hands aren't quite as steady as they used to be. Some people think it's the knees, it's the legs, the keepers of the house, but something is trembling. When strong men stoop, and as you get older, you start to get a little shorter. When the grinders cease because they are few, the teeth, right? And those looking through the windows grow dim, right? And so you're looking through your eyes and it's just not quite as crystal clear. And you look into, some of the beautiful babies' eyes that are around now, and you look into their eyes and you're like, dang, those eyes are so perfectly crystal clear. The stages of life. Applying the stages of life. So when is it that we're supposed to be a Christian? When is it that we're supposed to be meditating on the law of the Lord day and night? When is it that we're supposed to be applying these parables of Jesus? When is it that we're supposed to be evergreen? The answer is yes. In terms of the stages of life, we are supposed to honor God throughout all the stages of our life, especially if we want the blessings of God in our lives. We're called to remain green in all the stages of our life. Apply those parables and all of those things. And then there's the seasons of life, right? Now, seasons are different. Seasons are different than stages. Stages are more physiological and they're more developmental, and you can kind of break them down. Seasons are different kinds of things. And we talk naturally, we have 4 seasons here in Canada. We have winter, spring, summer, and fall, or autumn. And they're very distinct, and we know exactly how they are because there's leaves falling, or there's snow falling, or there's rain falling, or it's hot. And those seasons are going to change regardless. We have to keep living throughout all of those seasons. It's the same in our spiritual lives. There are seasons in our lives that come and go. You remember the season of high school? Some of you can think back. Think about all the grief you caused those teachers. Think about where you used to go and what you were interested in. Different than it is now, right? That was a season, right? College, although you were in basically the same developmental stage, was another different season, right? When you were young married or when you were a young adult, another different season, different interests. Then you became an adult. Dave Kirkham, right? You're in the season of Harley Davidson right now, right? Like, let's ride, baby, right? There's going to come a day where it's like, you know what? I think I'm going to sell my bike. Not today or tomorrow. There's the gardening season, right? There's all the different interests, and they come and they go, and they take our interest and they take our time. There was a season in my life when I had a mullet. I actually had hair, yes. You may not believe that. There's seasons of difficulty, aren't there? You want to track back to the adolescent years. Season, right? It wasn't necessarily a stage. It was just 18 months. It was just 6 months. And it was just like, I don't know if we're going to get through this. This is hard. This is a season, right? You with me? A work season, right? A marital season. The ups and the downs of the life, of the marital life. Mental illness, physical illness, or supporting others. Anybody been there where you're supporting others because they have a season of illness and you're walking through? It's not developmental stage. So again, we ask the question, when are we supposed to honor God in the seasons of life? And the answer once again is yes. Ecclesiastes, to quote that once again. Again, Solomon, so wise. He said, for everything there is a season and a time, and for every activity under heaven, there's a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to harvest, a time to kill, and a time to heal. There's a time to tear down and a time to build up. There's a time to cry and a time to laugh. A time to grieve and a time to dance. There's a time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to turn away. A time to search, a time to quit searching. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear, a time to mend. A time to be quiet and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time of peace. So in the season of your life, are you still seeking God? Because it can be challenging. When those seasons are challenging and you're fighting through the season, are you still working towards God? Because that's where the evergreen life will be found. In the stages, in the seasons, and then also in the storms. Nobody likes the storms. The storms are natural too. Life cycles natural, just like plants. Seasons are natural, right? Just like for us. Storms are natural. We had a doozy of a storm a couple weeks ago. Peterborough, Ottawa, they were without power for a week, and trees were down, power outages. Oh, why? Because of a storm. The storm didn't last 18 months. The storm didn't last the life cycle. The storm was a day or half a day, and it caused damage, and then it was gone. And those storms can be devastating. Those storms can be treacherous. People can die. In storms, you can perish in the middle of a natural storm, and also you can perish in the middle of a personal storm as well. Personal storms, they come, and we don't invite them. We don't want the economic issue. When the government, if the government calls, that's a storm. Okay, I'll just tell you that. CRA's calling you on the phone, and it's not one of those scammers, but it's legit. That's a storm. When you go to the doctor, that could be a storm. Right? The relationship, that could be a storm. Raising teenagers, I don't know why I keep going back there, but raising teenagers could be a storm. Jesus knew about this, didn't he? Jesus knew about this. In fact, he gave us a story, he gave us an actual event, but it can apply to us as well in a spiritual sense. Mark 4, 35, 41. It says, that day when evening came, he said to his disciples, let us go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him, and a furious squall came up. The waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. And Jesus was in the stern of the boat, sleeping on a cushion, like Jesus does when there's a storm. He doesn't get in a flap, right? Jesus is just fine, thank you very much. The disciples woke him and said to him, Teacher, don't you care if we drown? And I don't think they were using hyperbole. I think they were seasoned fishermen, and they were like, dang, this is a storm. And this could take us all out. And here Jesus has the audacity of sleeping in the back of the boat. Some scholars have said that Jesus prophetically said, we're going to the other side. And so it didn't matter what happened, that boat was going to reach the other side of the shore, storm or not. However, the disciples didn't know that. And so Jesus gets up and he rebukes the wind and said to the waves, quiet, be still. And the wind died down and it was completely calm. And his disciples, he said to his disciples, why are you so afraid? Do you not have faith? You feel like Jesus maybe says this to you every once in a while when that storm rolls up and you're just like, but Jesus, and you're all hyperventilating. You're like, the storm. And Jesus is like, you just woke me, number one, from my nap. Number two, calm down. I'm with you. We're going to get through this storm together. And we have to apply the truth of God in the stages, the seasons, and the storms. And I hate to be doom and gloom, but this is the reality of where we are. I think probably, as much as we've talked about all those things, applying this brings reality to it. It's like, we're just doing Sunday school if we're just talking about the parables of Jesus. This is back to the days of the film strip when I was a kid back at Broadway Tabernacle in Orangeville. But when you have to apply it and you have to admit that, one day I'm going to pass away because I'm going through these natural stages of life. And I'm going through these seasons of life, and I want to honor God in my seasons. I'm also going through some storms. I want to honor God through the storms. All of a sudden it's like, okay, well, talking about being evergreen is not pie in the sky. It takes work. But God is calling us in the stages, and the seasons, and the storms to actually continue to live for him. You know who the poster child for this is? I actually wanted to preach. I told Carolyn, I think I changed my message about 4 times. So you're getting 4 messages here for the price of 1. So I think that's a good deal. The poster child for honoring God in the stages, seasons, and storms of life is David. I would encourage you to read through 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, track through David. I mean, he's the guy that is credited for this Psalm 1 that says, he's like a person who is like a tree planted by streams of water, bears fruit in season. His leaf doesn't wither. It's like, this is impossible. All leaves wither at some point, don't they? No, not by David's standards. Just take a thumbnail sketch of David's life and walk through 70 years of evergreen living. David started as a shepherd boy. That's where we meet him. Remember, we read about it last week? We read about it recently. Samuel comes to anoint, right? And all these big boys come out, all these strapping men, and they're all, got the hair, and they're all, beefy and all this kind of stuff. And Jesse is so proud to roll these boys out. And Samuel's like, no, I haven't seen the one yet. Is there one? Is there any more? It's like, well, we have the one. We have David. Yeah, that's the one. And David comes running out. He's, in his farm gear, and he's been tending the sheep, and he's just a boy. And Samuel says, yeah, that's the one. God, a man after God's own heart. We look on the outside. God looks on the inside. God could tell from that moment, Evergreen, this kid, he's out there playing his harp, protecting sheep, killing lions, killing bears, right? He's doing a great job. Loves me, loves his family. He was the poet. He was the shepherd boy. He was the poet. He became in that moment the heir apparent with the anointing. And then we see a few years later, he became the hero with probably the most famous Bible story of all time. You want to talk about a storm? How about a war? How about going to deliver bread to your family? Bread and cheese. That's a storm. Fee, fi, fo, fum. My name's Goliath. I'm going to kill you. And that doesn't rhyme. I apologize. Who is this? Stranger of God. And why are you so afraid? Because my life is evergreen. And it doesn't matter the storm I'm in. Just point me in the direction. My God will take care of this. Bears fruit in season, right? Whatever he does prospers. And we all know the story of the hero David. Then he became the musician in Saul's court. Pretty impressive to play for a king, wouldn't you say? And then he went from Saul's court to becoming a warrior. And they said of David that Saul killed his thousands, David killed his tens of thousands. He was so successful. This guy is just prospering on every side. He's not even 20 years old at this point. Anointed still king, and everybody's sitting back going, is this actually going to happen? And then we all know that David became the fugitive. And for 8 years, if you can imagine a season where you were running for your life for 8 years and asking those questions, God, where are you? And God, what about what you promised? And God, I don't see it. And God, should I keep this thing up or what? And he had the chance to overthrow Saul and to kill Saul and do all those things. And he didn't do it. Why? Because he wanted to honor Saul, because he wanted to honor God. Powerful as a fugitive. He lived in caves. If you want to read some great Psalms, there's some Psalms that David wrote while he was in a cave. We like to write songs, right, when we're comfortable, when the AC is on, right? We're well fed. There's, we got the water bottle because we wouldn't want our throat to get a tickle. David is writing Psalms in the cave as a fugitive. Evergreen. After he was a fugitive, Saul was tracking him down. He invoked the wrath of the Philistines. And the Philistines came and killed both Saul and Jonathan, and that left David to be anointed as king. And you know what? What Samuel saw in him was seen in him by the people of Israel, the children of Israel. And they're like, we will call him king. You know why? Because of all of what I just read. And he is a man after God's own heart, and he is evergreen. And although he's not from the loins of Saul, we're gonna acknowledge him as the king of Israel. Now David's king. Imagine going from living in a cave to living in a palace. You know, success is great, but as you all know, there are trappings to success, aren't there? We talked about it last week. It's hard to serve God when you're poor. It's also hard to serve God when you're rich. And now David has access to everything that he would ever want. But he's successful. He conquers Jerusalem. He brings back the Ark of the Covenant and the spirit of worship to the temple. He starts to build the temple. He makes plans to build the temple. Everything is cooking with gas for David. And then you know what I love about the Bible? Is the heroes always have a chink in the armor, don't they? They always have a flaw. And David was no different. Even though he had a great track record, remained evergreen. King David, hero David, worshiper David, poet David, shepherd boy David became adulterer David, murderer David. And in turn, repentant David. You know, of all of the things, I think this shows that he's evergreen because his heart, even though he had strayed, his heart at the foundational level was still willing to hear, you are that man. You stole and you killed. And he was like, God, restore unto me the joy of my salvation. Cast me not away from your presence, O God. He was repentant. I don't know about you, but I find that the more successful people get, the less they're willing to hear from anybody else. Because they just think, why should I listen to anybody else? Look at me, I'm so successful. I'm more successful than any people in my life. But when Nathan came to him, he became the repentant David. And then he became the target of an attack and an overthrow. He experienced Absalom's rebellion. I don't think Absalom was a teenager. However, Absalom came at him and was trying to overthrow his kingdom. Talk about a storm. When your kids, I mean, it's bad enough, you know, you can't control your kids how much cereal they eat. Right? That's bad enough. But when your kids are trying to kick you out of your own house, that's a big issue. That's a storm. David weathered that storm. Absalom died. Then Adonijah came along and declared himself king, and that was a big problem. Going to overthrow him. David anointed Solomon, and Solomon carried on the lineage of David. He was the lever of a legacy. I don't even know whether that's proper grammar. You know what his final words were? We heard from Psalm 1, kind of the musings of David at the initial stages. What were David's final words? There's a bunch of stuff. He said a bunch of stuff. He was still in his right brain enough to actually get, hey guys, write this down. This is important. And I love this. 2 Samuel 23. There's only 24 chapters in Samuel. He says, the Spirit of the Lord spoke through me. His word was on my tongue. Remember the beginning? Meditate on his law day and night. All of a sudden now the Spirit of the Lord spoke through me. His word was on my tongue. The God of Israel spoke, and the Rock of Israel said to me, when one rules over the people in righteousness, he rules in the fear of God. From beginning to end, David feared God. He is like the light of the morning at sunrise on a cloudless morning, and like the brightness after rain that brings grass from the earth. I love those words. There's a bunch more, which is great. We just don't have the time to read through it. So how are you going to apply this? How are you going to apply this to your life spiritually? I pray to God that to a person in this room, that this this following Jesus thing wouldn't be fleeting and wouldn't be fruitless. You can come to church your whole life and not do a whole lot of bearing fruit. That comes by really digging in. No pun intended on that one. So I'm going to close with a parable, and I pray that this is inspiring to you. I feel like for me, because I mean I'm right at the middle point. Am I going to live to be 104? I don't know. Probably not. I probably won't be much use at 104. I'll tell you that. Not much use now. So, anyways, I'm a little past my halfway point. Can I get a witness? I'm at a significant point where where I liken it to a mountain. I feel like I'm at the top of a mountain where I can see my infancy, my toddlerhood, my childhood, right? My adolescence. Thank the Lord I got through my adolescence. My young adulthood, my young married life. I can see raising kids. I can see all that. And then I can also see down the other side where I'm like, I got to bring this in for a landing. One day God is going to call me home. And I can see the whole life cycle, the whole span. And I'm like, even more convinced, maybe my earlier years weren't fruitful enough. Maybe I need to push more into this to become more evergreen. Can I do that? So I just hope it's inspiring for you. So it has been my desire to write a parable myself, so I'm just going to read this parable and then we're going to close. So don't throw tomatoes. This is my first parable ever. So anyways, here's the parable, and it applies to what we've been talking about here. It's God just kind of showed me this yesterday morning, just out on my back deck. It's the story of two farmers. The first farmer was a wise farmer, and in the dark, cold winter months, he spent preparing for the months ahead. He planned out his crops, maintained his machines, and ensured that his seed was ordered on time. In the spring months, he excitedly got to the fields early, and even though the conditions weren't perfect, he worked hard in his field, cultivating the soil, removing the rocks and weeds. He fertilized the soil and planted his seed and prayed that it would grow. Through the late spring and the summer months, there were some major storms that came through, threatening his crops. The stormy season soon gave way to times of dryness and drought, but he consistently monitored and faithfully tended as he watched these crops miraculously grow and form shoots out of the ground. One night, strangers unexpectedly came and destroyed some of his crops. He was surprised and devastated at the damage, but he figured that he and his family would be all right because he had planned and planted more than enough for what his family needed, and he knew that he would have more than enough come harvest time. As summer turned to autumn, the farmer went out into his field and joyfully found the luscious fruit that he had grown. He recognized the goodness of God, who had provided a bumper crop for him and his family. With the help of his family and some workers that he had hired, he gathered up all of the nutritious food. His hard work paid off. He reflected on his toiling, his sowing, his fertilizing, his weeding. He couldn't see the harvest back then, but all of that hard work in the moment. Couldn't see all that hard work in the moment, although he couldn't see the harvest. He was faithful to what was in front of him. He had a great celebration feast at the end of the season, and he shared it with his family and friends. His barns were full of food for the winter, and he knew his family was going to be well taken care of. He spent time teaching his children what he had learned and talked about the expansion plans for the coming year. He repeated this challenging yet fulfilling process faithfully year after year as he raised his family. He saw the seasons come and go. He watched the storms pass. At the end of his life, he sat back reflecting on the work that he had done, the knowledge that he had acquired, and was happy that he had passed it down to his kids and watched them reproduce through the stages of their lives. There were always struggles. There were always storms, but he couldn't help but smile at the faithfulness of God. The second farmer enjoyed the winter months, resting and relaxing as he read by the light of the warm fire. He didn't spend too much time planning or preparing for the coming spring months because he knew that he would figure something out. Spring came sooner than he expected, and when he went out to the fields, he noticed that they were wet and hard to work with and not quite ready for planting. He decided that he would maintain his machines instead. He also remembered that he needed to order his seed and was surprised to find out that there was no seed available with his supplier. They were all sold out. Now he anxiously was playing a bit of catch up, hoping that he could source some seed, maintain his machines, and get his crops in on time. When his seed arrived, he realized that he had not spent any time preparing the ground. It was overgrown with weeds and rocks. He eventually did get his seed into the ground, but it was weeks behind schedule, and the ground that was once too wet for planting was now hard and dry. The spring storms came through and uprooted a lot of his plants because they didn't have deep enough roots required to hold them in the ground. And he was devastated as he looked at the devastation. He said, "What am I going to do now? The drought in the late summer months did not provide adequate water for the remainder of his plants to grow." He recognized he did not have near enough for what he and his family would need for the winter months ahead. He bitterly picked through what was left of his crops and wondered why his life was so hard and why he could never catch any breaks. He decided that he would go to his farmer friend down the road who always seemed to catch all the breaks and asked if he could buy some food. The other farmer graciously gave from the surplus of what he had. As the autumn turned once again to winter, the farmer sank low and bitterly told his kids how difficult life was. He blamed his losses on the storms that came through and how devastating the drought was. He talked of how the seasons came early and stayed late and how it's hard to time them right. He frustratingly repeated this process the following year. The seasons came and went. The new storms seemed even more devastating than the ones before. And at the end of his life, he was bitter and wounded and kicked against the toils of life that seemed all for nothing. Story of two farmers. Leave that with you to ponder. But I want to leave you with the overwhelming and inspirational thought that remaining evergreen in the life of God, like farmer number one, it takes work, but it's worth it. It's worth it. There's a payoff. Just like in Psalm 1, it says, when you don't do these things and you do these things and meditate on the law of the Lord day and night, you'll be like a tree planted by streams of water, bearing fruit in season. Leaf does not wither. Whatever you do prospers. All the stages are going to come and go. All the seasons are going to come and go. Storms are going to come and go. The question remains, will you remain in the game long enough to remain evergreen?